It is my privilege to introduce our guest speaker. There are plenty of places you can learn about his distinguished career, so instead of repeating those details, I want to briefly describe what Dr. Mukherjee's work means to me as a pre-med student. What is most remarkable to me about Dr. Mukherjee's career is the breadth of his understanding. He is an incredibly accomplished doctor and researcher who deeply understands the science of cancer research and is advancing it in his lab. He is also a great historian who shows us how the most current and advanced medical science is the product of very long historical processes. And thirdly, he understands people. In his books, essays, documentaries, and lectures, he has illuminated how society, politics, and human behavior all shape science. This is what is remarkable and inspiring to me as someone who is hopefully starting a career in medicine. During my time in Professor Lois Banta's lab this year, Professor B. Thoroni's in previous years, and throughout my college lab courses, I've worked with professors and classmates to study a number of biological processes across a range of disciplines. I've had incredible experiences in the lab, and ultimately I'm inspired by opportunities to conduct research that could be scientifically and medically useful. But as I get ready to leave Williams and pursue medical school, I also have to think about the human aspects. We pursue our studies out of scientific curiosity, but also because we want to help people. And we do that work in a historical and social context amid ethical and political and economic debates, among others. Ultimately, medicine and medical science are human social processes, and they are ways that we can situate ourselves within the biological universe. Dr. Mukherjee has done more than almost anyone alive to make us aware of this fact, and to ask us to make sure that we do that work in ways that are both scientifically valuable and serve humanity. That goal inspires me, and whatever field you work in, I hope similar questions will inspire you too, and I'm sure he will have valuable advice for us all. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Siddhartha Mukherjee.
Thank you, President Mandel, the faculty, scholars, fellow honorees, and friends, and most importantly, thank you and an enormous congratulations to the class of 2024. I'm deeply honored and humbled to be able to participate at your commencement, and may I begin by asking all of you yourselves to give yourself a round of applause, and don't stop until your heart is full. Please continue. Congratulations. This may count as a ceremony of the brain, but I'm going to talk from my heart. I'm going to talk about one truth, about one journey to find truth, and I'm going to leave you with one task. Every graduation marks two transitions, a birth and a death. It would be tempting and easy, of course, to begin with the birth. And yes, I will come to that, but perhaps, surprisingly, allow me to begin with the latter, with death. Parents and graduates, don't worry, this is not a morbid talk, but an uplifting one. It's a talk that I hope that you will remember as you think about your own birth and rejuvenation. Let me begin with a personal truth. My truth is marked by two statements and two questions. But first, some context. I'm a physician, an oncologist. I see cancer patients, and my goal is to treat and sometimes cure the deadliest of diseases. And despite having a degree in overeducation, I fail. I fail often. There's a common trope written into the conventional ethos of medicine that the patient fails the treatment. But for me, that trope is always reversed. I fail the patient. What happens at that moment? Here we arrive at the most profound of transitions, and we arrive at a moment that is elemental, ancient, and universal, a moment that we've encountered since the birth of our species. I have, to state the obvious, not experienced it myself, but I've borne witness to it more than 1,000 times. A 7-year-old girl with advanced leukemia died in a clinical trial last month, her heart fluttering at 300 beats per minute as she held her mother's hand. A young English professor with ovarian cancer who was denied her dream to finish her last book. An elderly man with prostate cancer who had just welcomed a grandchild. In the days before these patients and many others like them have died, I've asked them if they've had things that they've wanted to say or do in anticipation of that final moment. And of course, the answers have been broad and diverse. Some have wanted to climb mountains. Some have wanted to read poems. I heard a fly buzz. Some have wanted to rage against fate. Some have wanted peace and sanctity. But over time, I began to see a pattern, a universality, a convergence. Abstracted, simplified, stripped of particularities, every person that I've met at this moment of transition wanted to make 4 offerings. 2 statements, 2 questions, directed at someone that they knew, or perhaps someone that they've never explicitly spoken these words to. I want to tell you that I love you. I want you to tell me that you love me. I want to tell you that I forgive you. I want to ask you for your forgiveness. 4 offerings. Offerings so important and profound that I must force myself, even as I speak to the most attentive and sympathetic of audiences, to repeat them. I want to tell you that I love you. I want you to tell me that you love me. I want to tell you that I forgive you. I want to ask you for your forgiveness. Love and forgiveness, death and transition. But what, you might ask now, does any of this have to do with graduation? Perhaps you're thinking, oh God, he's picked up the wrong papers for the speech. This was the one he wrote for a funeral. But no, since we've broken the rules of a commencement speech, let's continue to break some more. I want you to perform an exercise. Some of you are sitting next to friends, some with parents, some are together, some dispersed. Close your eyes if you'd like. Turn to someone that matters in your life, physically or mentally, and really, really think about this as you say to them, I want to tell you that I love you. I want to ask you to tell me that you love me. I want to tell you that I forgive you. I want to ask you for your forgiveness. Do it this afternoon if you wish to. Do it as you walk out of this room, or do it when you're at home packing your suitcases for that new job in New York or Toledo or Accra or New Delhi. But do it now to mark this moment of transition. Don't wait. For the moment that you are inhabiting, experiencing, encountering also marks a transition. There's a birth and the death. And here is the crux. This is the lesson that we can learn from dying, that we can also apply to life and to living. Waiting merely delays the inevitable. Do it at this moment as you cross the door, or as you wait for the car to take you to the airport with your overstuffed suitcases, just as you will do it when you await the final crossing, where there's nothing to carry and only a lonely boat to help you cross the river. These 4 offerings, 2 questions and 2 statements, mark my personal truth. It took me years, even decades, a lifetime of immersion in medicine and caregiving to recognize the universality of these 2 simple sentences. First, that there is a lesson in dying that we must incorporate into living. And second, that this lesson belongs not just to the final crossing, but to every crossing, including this one. Accept and return love, accept and return forgiveness. But perhaps I've left or introduced a lingering sense of unease in this room. I've tossed in a difficult, uncomfortable word, and I've used it without apologies. I've used it with no hyphens, no inverted quotes, no italics, no question mark at the end, not truth, but simply truth. And now you're thinking, he's really lost it. Having just finished about death, now he's going to talk about truth. Really? Yes, really. I have here two props. Books published by Mahatma Gandhi, both first editions, both collections of essays from the 1940s and 1950s. The first is called Civil Disobedience, a Working Manual, and the second, Freedom, a User's Guide. Nope, I lied. That's not true. In fact, if you look closely, the first is called Village Industries, and the second is called Cooperative Farming. I'll spare you the full contents of this collection. One contains a scintillating piece on composting and the manufacture of manure. The second has an equally intriguing piece on the various merits of spinning cotton into coarse cloth. Why am I telling you all of this? Because there is a mythopoetic image of Gandhi popularized in films and hagiographies in which a bespectacled and half-naked lawyer, reeling from humiliating encounters with the British in London and South Africa, apparitions suddenly in India like a peacenik Cheshire cat. This is comic book Gandhi, the superhero in a loincloth. He wakes up one morning and marches to the ocean shore to protest the absurd salt tax proposed by the empire, and thus, perhaps, one is made to think, is born the most significant of his personal truths, the idea of civil disobedience. But the real plot is different. The real Gandhi is at first a deep scholar of history, of law, of culture, and of course, agriculture. Long before he becomes Mahatma, the great soul, he is a searching, doubtful, agonized, peripatetic soul. He travels through India on third-class train compartments. He lives with the so-called untouchables and spins cotton to understand the nation's soul. He reads voraciously. He consumes Buddhism, Christianity, Hindu theology, English poetry, Marx, Mill, the writings of Luther. He cleans toilets, he learns to farm, and he makes compost. Nearly half a decade passes, and then slowly, like a slow-burning fire, it begins to come. It is here, too, buried in one sentence on village life, and I quote, "Non-violence with its techniques of Satyagraha, literally clinging to the truth without violence, and non-cooperation will be the sanction of our community." Arguably one of the most provocative sentences in the history of politics, in human history, a sentence that shook nations, sent shivers through colonial governments, shamed armies of men, and toppled empires, buried quietly in a book called Cooperative Farming. What do we make of this? These books and exploratory essays within them represent an incredible intellectual journey. In Cooperative Farming, Gandhi found the seeds of non-cooperative civil disobedience. The compost was a metaphor of transformation, the decomposition of the shreds and peels of a morally spent empire that would enable the rebirth of a nation. In Village Government, he formulated the idea of localized, distributive, self-reliant governance. In Spinning Cotton, he learned to spin history. Truth, then, to Gandhi, was not a divine revelation, but a discovery. Not a product, but a process. It could only be found through an immersive journey that took him across a vast, unbounded physical subcontinent and an even vaster, unbounded metaphysical continent. It had to be excavated, brought to life, for it might be buried, for all you know, in a book. Truth was not divined, it was realized. It was a fragile, shape-shifting thing, a loincloth, not a straitjacket. It had to be learned, studied, wrapped around oneself. You had to learn to feel it, touch it, know it. You had to fold it into shapes, twist it, and ask whether the cloth would still fit. And perhaps most importantly, you had to doubt it, subject it to reason and skepticism, pull it taut to test its resilience. It is not a coincidence that Gandhi's most famous book is not called My Conclusions About Truth, but rather My Experiments with Truth. Experiments with personal truths. There's only one challenge in post-college life. Graduation leaves you with a singular mission to discover a personal truth. But you won't find it easily. You'll have to experiment with it, question it, reason with it. You may have to travel through your own metaphysical continent, a dangerous, tortuous journey that you should not underestimate. You may have to reject that truth at first and only accept it once it has passed the skepticism that your education has taught you to exercise. You have to read it, learn it, immerse yourself in it. The point is this most magnificent institution has prepared you to start the journey. And I know that you will take it with utmost seriousness. Your truth is not something to be casually discovered. You will have to immerse yourself in its history, its geography, the landscape it inhabits, the stories it encompasses. Gandhi didn't have a liberal arts education, but he invented one from scratch with one sole purpose: to propel himself in his quest. Fortunately, you've been armed with the tools of reason and thinking. And so as you leave this august ceremony and this beautiful place, you begin your own journey of discovery. It's time to begin your experiment with truth. Death, truth. I'm not going to talk about taxes, but we have covered a lot of forbidden ground. Why not end this with birth? What, again, you might ask, does one do with a personal truth? I gave you 4 offerings, but I could also describe them as 4 responsibilities. I'm the child of a refugee. In 1946, a few weeks before the partition of India, a transition so gory and bloodstained that it still defies words and memory, my grandmother, a young widow then, left what is now Bangladesh with 5 boys and a steel suitcase. She arrived in Calcutta, a nervous, broken city on the edge of riots, a city already overburdened and spent. She set up a home in a 1-room tenement. The children inhabited the room, and she slept in a makeshift kitchen. There's no money for food, so there would be money for books. At night, each of the boys got half a piece of white paper and a shared pencil to finish homework. I might note in passing that over the last 5 years, I've written 3 papers that have formed the core for the discovery of 3 novel cancer drugs. In each case, the essential idea was scribbled with a pencil on half a sheet of white paper. Years later, when my grandmother came to live with us in Delhi, the steel suitcase that had been ferried across so many cities came with her. But it remained in the back of her closet, sealed shut. No one knew what it contained. She would parry questions about it, and it would slowly be forgotten. When she died, I opened the suitcase. There were, of course, predictable objects of a refugee's last grabbings. Mementos of ardor and desperation, some jewelry, a portrait, letters, an old shawl, pockmarked by moths. But in the midst of this, wrapped in cloth, were 4 school books. Books? Some years before she had died, I'd asked her what I was to do with the contents of the suitcase, and she had said, mysteriously, give them back. But the content was so outdated that there was no giving back. It left me totally mystified. Who cares about a math textbook from the 1940s? In 1986, when I was 16, I walked into the library at Berkeley University. There were shelves upon shelves of books. Einstein, Newton, The Lives of a Cell, Darwin, Rousseau, Frantz Fanon, Baldwin, Dickinson, Monroe. In looking longingly at those overstuffed shelves from which knowledge might perhaps just pour out like golden liquid, if I just gave the shelf a small jolt, I decided that I too would make a transition. I would also pick up a suitcase and migrate, seeking a new life, new knowledge, and new books. It would be unseemly and frankly desecrating to make any comparison between my grandmother's migration and mine. But in keeping with the family tradition, I too underwent a transition and a rebirth. I came to study abroad. But it was only after I finished medical school in my late 20s that I returned to my grandmother's request. Give them back. Stupid, stupid me. It wasn't the books with their outdated equations and old school writing. It was the responsibility that comes with transitions and rebirths. And it was, perhaps fittingly, a reformulation of the four offerings. And perhaps you can think through them with me again. I want to understand how to return love. I want to understand how I can have my love returned. I want to forgive. I want to understand how to accept forgiveness. And so there you have it, a reformulation of my personal truths into personal responsibilities, into action. It is the ultimate form of rebirth, since it enables the emergence, the composting of the new you. And that is the answer. The purpose of finding a personal truth is to transform it into an action. Once you've finished your experiment, that is, once you've finished the quest, it is time for action, but not before. You will transform your truth into a responsibility, and that in turn will enable the birth of your new self. It does not escape me that I titled my speech The Four Offerings. That word offering. It is operative here, for it implies not just an acceptance at death, but a giving at birth. Do both, and do them with the utmost conviction. Thank you so much.